and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do we have any correspondence or comments from the public this evening?
We have some correspondence.
Okay, well, hang on just one moment. Okay, don't see any from the public. All right. Board Secretary Rob Fowler.
We received a note from the Ingham Intermediate School District, the ISD. Please consider this memo as formal notification regarding the results of the June 3rd, 2013 Ingham Intermediate School District Board of Education election. Mr. Michael Flowers and Miss Erin Shore were each chosen to serve 6-year terms of office beginning July 1, 2013 and running through June 30th, 2019. On behalf of the Ingham Intermediate School District, I want to express sincere appreciation for your district's participation in our board election from Stan Kogut, Superintendent.
Great. Thank you, Rob. Superintendent's report.
I think, Chris, you deserve the credit for making that drive this year.
I made the drive, and I got to count ballots, so I
Okay.
can tell you that was.
So-
We elected the 2 people running for the 2 open seats.
Well, thank you for making that drive. I have a couple items. Number one, I want to congratulate Principal Wojcicki, who's with us this evening, as well as I see Dan Kohler and Kevin Toby, on a great, and the high school, all the high school staff, parent volunteers, and teachers and so on for a successful graduation. I understand the ceremony went off without a hitch. I was sorry I was unable to be there, and I want to thank Sharon Jones for stepping in for me and at the last possible moment to do that. So thank you, Sharon, for the opening remarks last Sunday. And then staff resignations. I think everybody knows that I've accepted the resignations of Eric and Teresa Wangerman, who have been with the district for over 20 years each. And both of them are taking positions, similar positions in the Traverse City Public Schools. So we wish them the best. I know it was a tough decision on their part, but I know it's something that they've been wanting to do for at least the last 4 or 5 years. So congratulations to them. It's certainly a loss for us, but we wish them the best. And so that concludes my report this evening.
Thank you. We have several discussion items this evening, and we're going to talk a little bit about textbooks. And I'd like to have Dan Kohler come up from the high school science department and talk to us a little bit about textbooks. Textbooks specifically, right, Dan?
I just have one. It's the AP Chem book, and I have the proposal. If you guys, do you have it in front of you, or do you want? Yes. Okay. This is the AP audit year. So this particular year, we have to go through a new audit process. Everybody in the country has to. So the 2014 exam, you have to have a new book, and so it's pretty easy on that one. I was pretty shocked when I checked it. It has to be a college textbook, and they're $250 to $300. But I did find through Cengage Learning, those were $138. And what they did is they took all the problems out of the book, and all the problems are online. And of course, you have to pay for that, but it was only $138 for the book. The kids will do their homework online using OWL, which is what more places use OWL for chemistry homework than any other program in the country. And so I had her give me the proposal for 70 AP Chem books, and you can't get older ones because none of them have the new curriculum, and that's the very first thing on the audit. So you can't put AP next to it on the transcript. They'll actually go after you if you do that. That's their baby. And so a few years ago they went through this, and our current books are 25 years old.
Wow.
So, well, we were going to change them in 2007, but they were supposed to do the new curriculum in 2008, so it didn't make any sense, even though they were kind of overdue then. It got shot down, and so it's 2013 is they finally have the new curriculum in place. So anyway, if you have any questions, just ask me. It was a lot harder to do than I thought it was going to be. There's just not a lot out there. They're changing how they're teaching chemistry, literally.
For the better?
I think so. They're finally cutting the material down, so I think less is more, and more on the critical thinking and applying stuff, and not so much on the overwhelming amount of knowledge.
Is it standard that most AP classes use college textbooks as opposed to textbooks for AP high school classes?
You have to. It has to be.
All okay.
Right. Well, this is actually a modified textbook, so it's a hybrid version. And so I went through only those people that have made it through the audit, and Cengage Learning put this together. The most famous book in AP Chem is Zumdahl, but the Zumdahl list price is $330. This is one where they're still using the Zumdahl textbook, but they're able to offer it more cheaply somehow by taking all the problems out of it and then using their problems online. So it should, I'm imagining it'll get through the audit process, but I can't do that process until I know I have a book.
Sounds good.
Anyone have questions for Dan?
Dan, so you said it was $138?
Right, plus the OWL,
So the
and
OWL is-
$5 per student, renewable annually, and so you're still better off. But then they priced it out $25 per student, and then we'd have it for 6 years. And they said the price never goes up. I have no guarantee on that probably, but.
Anyone else? Thanks, Dan, we appreciate you taking the time to
Okay.
be here tonight.
I'm glad you're up and around, Mike. Don't worry about you. All right, thank you.
Next, we have Kevin Pilby from the high school math department, going to talk a little bit about pre-calculus.
I feel like I'm in a really similar situation to what Dan just told you there for the chemistry. Our pre-calculus books are 16 years old right now, and I came to you last year as we're transitioning away from the Chicago series, and we adopted the new Algebra 2 book, which I think went pretty well this year. We had a few bumps with the honors course that we're going to work through. But as we implemented that, we now have 87 students signed up for this fall for pre-calculus. We have 47 textbooks, even of the old ones. And so we're kind of in an issue here where we need something. And so we're looking at, because we do want to move away from the Chicago series, we wanted to find a text that would prepare students for a college-level calculus class or an AP class. And so we looked at the Stewart calculus that we use at the high school for the AP. They have a pre-calculus, and that's the textbook that's on there. Similar to what Dan talked about, as a college text, this book's way over $200. It's in the $250 range, and they cut a deal for high schools. I mean, I don't think $130 is a deal, but that's what they offer for us. There is a online component to it, but the $130 is an actual textbook. It has all the problems. It's the same book they use at the college level. They give us a deal because we're purchasing it in bulk. The online component is $5 per year. We're going to get a year of that for free, and we're going to take a look at that and evaluate it and see if it's really worthwhile. I know a lot of students at this level aren't as big into the online experience with it. They just want the textbook, they take it home, they do the problems, and they move on. I really, out of all the books that we took a look at, I like this one because it has a text complexity that the Common Core talks about a lot. It has just a ton of problems and a good variety of problems. It looks to get into the understanding a little bit more than some of the other texts that are out there. Overall, it's a pretty solid book, though. One thing I was speaking with Sharon beforehand. We're going to look at the shipping a little bit too on that because it's in there at a 10% rate, which we went from the same company last year for Algebra 2, and I believe if we look back at that, it's going to be a lot less than that. And so we're going to contact the person on there and see if maybe we could even go down and get the books. So. That's what I was thinking.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
I said if they're really in Chicago, I'm going to the American Girl store tomorrow with my daughter, and so I wouldn't mind stopping by on the way. And the math book place might be a little more exciting for me than the doll store. I don't know. We'll see.
In there.
Yeah, good luck. Huh?
The Lego store is.
We're heading there too, probably.
Yeah.
So if there's any questions.
Well, I think that the point is that these companies make a lot of their money. I mean, they do it certain ways, and this is one of them, where they
Right.
kind of pad the freight, so if you don't pay attention,
Right.
So they may be able to reduce that, and I know that there are firms out there who will, if you basically ask for freight at the shipping dock, and you can arrange for somebody else to pick that up
Right.
as a partial load as they're coming across, and they'll deliver it much cheaper. But, you know, it's a lot more hassle. Or we were talking that it's not that far away, that you're like you said,
Right.
somebody can just run
Sensible.
down there and get them. But obviously it takes time and stuff, but it's good to look into it and potentially can just say, hey, we're gonna come pick it up ourselves unless you cut it in half or something. So,
Right.
and with two of them, it's gonna probably make sense. It's good to look at.
So why a doubling almost in the number of students in PDM?
The Algebra 2 that we were using in the past, as I mentioned last year, wasn't quite up to standard with what Algebra 2 should be. The new textbook we have really covers Algebra 2 and a lot of what we used to cover in FST. And so a lot of our students now that are in the honors course are skipping over the FST and taking the pre-calculus.
Okay.
So they're going Algebra 2 honors, pre-calculus, calculus. We think this will be a way to get more students into AP Calc.
Okay.
And we also think that it's a better way to prepare them for their college class.
So it's not pulling kids from AP Calc?
No.
It's adding more on a track to get there?
Right. So I've taught pre-calculus or PDM for the last 8 years. This year, for example, it was all seniors except for 3 students. Okay, so we had 42 students and 3 of them were juniors, the rest seniors. Next year, it's going to be about half and half juniors, half seniors. And then those juniors will take calculus the year after. So.
Great.
Kevin, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks much.
Next under discussion items is the first reading of proposed replacement board policies. And as the chairperson of the Policy and Personnel Committee, I will be doing the first reading. These policies replace the former language in board policies 5510, 5512, 5540, and the result of new legislation from the state of Michigan. This might be the time, if anybody wants to switch over to Wheel of Fortune, feel free, 'cause it'll take a couple minutes. Maybe 4 or 5 minutes, come right back, and we'll go into some budget issues with Steve. The first one is 5512, teacher placement. The Board of Education considers the appropriate placement of effective teachers as an essential ingredient in promoting student academic growth, in attaining successful educational outcomes for students, and in providing quality educational services. Teacher placement decisions shall be guided by the following standards. These decisions will be premised on staffing the established curriculum with the most effective teachers who are certified and qualified to instruct the courses within the established curriculum, grades, and departments. In addition to certification and qualifications, teacher placement decisions shall be made on the basis of teacher effectiveness as determined through the teacher effectiveness criteria established in section 1248 of the revised school code and as articulated in district policy 5510, reduction and recall of teachers. Proposed new board policy 5510, reduction and recall of teachers. Decisions involving the reduction and recall of teachers shall be guided by the following standards and procedures. These decisions will be initially premised on retaining effective teachers who are certified or otherwise approved or authorized and qualified to instruct the courses within the established curriculum, grades, and departments. All teacher reductions and recalls are subject to formal action and approval by the Board of Education. This policy shall not operate or be applied to retain or recall a teacher whose most recent performance evaluation contains an overall rating of ineffective in preference to any teacher with a higher effectiveness rating as reflected in that teacher's most recent performance evaluation. A teacher's length of service with this district or the teacher's attainment of tenure under the Teachers Tenure Act shall not be the primary or determining factors in layoff and recall decisions, except if the decisions involve 2 or more teachers and all have the same effectiveness ratings as described in paragraph 9 of this policy. Paragraph 9, a teacher's effectiveness rating shall be determined according to the following standards. Individual performance. In arriving at the value of a teacher's effectiveness rating on the criterion of individual performance, the predominant factors shall be based on evidence shall be based on the evaluation results of demonstrated pedagogical skills. An additional factor in determining teacher effectiveness shall be to the extent to which the teacher has made clear, significant, and relevant accomplishments and contributions and has demonstrated a record of exceptional performance in that context. Those contributions and accomplishments must exceed the normal expectations for an individual in the teacher's professional peer group. The final factor in determining teacher effectiveness is the extent to which the teacher has engaged in relevant special training pertinent to the teacher's instructional assignment, and the extent to which the teacher has integrated that training into instruction in a meaningful way. Board Policy 5540, Teacher Discipline. The Board of Education believes that maintaining appropriate procedures and standards for addressing teacher misconduct and other inappropriate behavior is a critical ingredient in furthering an effective educational environment and in providing quality educational services necessary for the attainment of successful educational outcomes for students. Discharge, demotion, or other discipline of teachers under this policy shall be made only for a reason that is not arbitrary or capricious. Disciplinary measures include, but are not limited to, oral warning, memorialized in writing, written warning, written reprimand, paid or unpaid suspension, and discharge. Nothing in this policy or the identification of these levels of discipline requires that the above disciplinary measures be applied progressively or sequentially. The board reserves the right to apply the disciplinary sanction it determines to be appropriate to a specific set of circumstances. When disciplinary action is taken against a teacher, it shall be confirmed in writing. The document confirming the discipline will be provided to the teacher and placed in the teacher's personnel file. And lastly, Policy 8280, Electronic Communication Devices for students. Cellular telephones, pagers, beepers shall be turned off before school, during instructional or class time, during lunchtime, during passing times between classes, and at any school-sponsored events where there is a reasonable expectation of quiet attentiveness or where use of the device would cause disruption unless there is a bona fide health or emergency, unless permission has been granted by the building principal. Cellular telephone or audible back pager beepers shall be turned off during instructional or class time, during lunchtime, during passing times between classes, and any school-sponsored event where there is reasonable expectation of quiet attentiveness or where use of the device would cause any disruption unless there is a bona fide health or safety emergency, permission has been granted by the building superintendent. Building principal. Not sure exactly why I wanted to read that one twice, but I did. And I think that is it in regards to policies. That is the first reading. We will have this brought up here on the agenda in the next couple of weeks, potentially on June the 24th. That's the end of the policies. Our next discussion item is the budget. Sandy is going to talk a little bit about the final budget and some other issues regarding budget items.
Well, it's that fun time of year again when we do budget, and thank you, Ms. Belzer, for letting me follow you with the policies. Usually I have to follow a big crowd pleaser, and then everybody leaves, so. Yeah, you know, what can I say? No, so tonight we're going to talk about a couple things here. If I can get this. First of all, we're going to talk about the final budget amendment for the budget year that we're currently in now. It's going to be ending here at the end of June. So I'll talk a little about what changes have been made from the last time we made the amendment back in March. And then we'll talk about, obviously, the most important thing, the budget for next year. And then I'll have question and answers if anybody has any questions. Really, this hasn't changed too much from what we had from our first budget amendment. There's a little more in the way of expenses. We're projecting about a $500,000 deficit for this year. And as you recall, that was really made up of a couple things. One, the decision of the board to take some fund balance out to make a one-time payment to employee groups of about $200,000 as a part of the contract settlement for 2012-13. In addition to that, we took money out of fund balance to buy some buses. We continued on that path of replacing buses through the EPA grant, so there was about $120,000, $130,000 for that. And then the rest of that was just an existing operating deficit that carried over from the prior year, mainly due to all-day kindergarten, the implementation of all-day kindergarten last year. As you remember, we had to add quite a few staff to implement all-day kindergarten for next year. So if you look at the details of this, really there's not too much in the way of changes other than some miscellaneous adjustments. The one I do want to point out is the state is now, one of the things that the governor has promised to do or is committed to do is to go back to the pre-funding of health care for retirees. We went off that system a few years ago, and so now we're moving back onto that. And so essentially what the state is doing is instead of just directly funding that, they're actually giving a per pupil to districts, and then we're turning around and paying it back to MEPSers. So it's really an in and an out. But we are required to account for it that way. As you'll see in the budget for next year, it's even more money next year. It's just an effort for the state to pay that back, and I think it's an effort to show that they're actually giving some additional money funding to schools, but actually returning around and paying that back to the retirement system. So the other one to mention is Title I, Title II. Because of sequestration, the whole budget at the federal level, that we're potentially receiving less dollars in Title I, Title II. We got our allocation for next year, and they're again lower than we had in the prior year. So we're adjusting this downward to really reflect what that change is. So other than that, really, like I say, of the 270, the 259, most of it is of that 270. On the expense side, the same way, we have to add in the expense for that 270 that we're going to turn around and pay. We have some additional costs for special education, some small adjustments, interest expense, tax refunds, monies that we have to pay back for tax abatements, custodial substitutes. We had quite a few folks who were out on leave this year, so we had some additional costs there, but about $306,000 increase in expenditures. The difference between those two make the difference of about $35,000 in increased expenditures over where we were projecting. So if you look at our fund balance, we've had this trend downward in our difficult years. We stabilized a few years back. We started to build some of that up, and now we're back down to about 1.7 million. We're hopeful that we'll stay within that at the end of this year. And as you'll see in just a few moments, we're actually projecting a balanced budget for next year in hopes that we'll obviously stay within that 1.7 million. And actually, there may be some room to add a little fund balance for next year based on the funding that you'll see in just a few minutes here. So the good news is at the state level, we have two funds, the general fund and the school aid fund. The changes from January to May, basically, as we look at this, they always are looking at 3 years, the closeout year, the current year, and the year forward when they do their projections. But the revenue projections were positive to the extent that back in January, this number was negative to the school aid fund for last year, and now it's positive. And as you can see in a few minutes, the legislators decided to add some additional dollars for K-12 education over what they were originally projecting based on the governor's numbers back in February. So that's good news. The general fund, I believe, is somewhere around $500,000 or half a billion dollars in the positive too. So some of that's carryover money to help for the next year's budget. But the good news is I believe the state's starting to see that trend upwards. So that's good for K-12 education. The one caution and concern is this whole general fund contribution piece. As you know, years ago, when we went to Proposal A, that number was about $650 million. That went down to about the statutory minimum a few years ago, $20 million. And because of the shuffling of the deck of, moving expenditures from general fund into the school aid fund and all of those things, we've seen this number go up. So, we're now reliant on the general fund when we weren't reliant just a few years ago. So, and that's a lot of how they shifted property taxes and Michigan business tax and those types of things. But I just wanted to point that out. That's the one thing we have to look at for future years is that general fund contribution piece. Couple of things with the budget that have kind of gone back and forth as to what they're going to have for next year. The best practices. This is not new to us other than the fact that we've kind of expanded on the categories that we have to meet. We have to meet 7 of the 8 criteria. We've met this in the past. It used to be 5 of 6, then it was 7 of 8. Now it's still going to be 7, 8, except for they're going to expand on a few of the things that we have to do. The governor was proposing to cut this. The state and Senate were going to get rid of it, I believe, in total, and then it came back at the same funding that we had for last year, which was $52 per student. So the good news is we're not losing money, but we're not getting any additional money. And so for next year, you'll see in our budget projections that we're going to produce the whole $52 in our budget projections. This,
Just one thing to add, go back a slide.
sure.
We haven't gotten the final version of the school aid act, but that last item, number 8, I believe has changed, so that it's not so restrictive, that the phys ed's gotta be the same as the state board adopted policy.
Okay,
It's like you have to offer phys ed.
okay.
It's almost as simple as that. So,
And one of the,
once those things get finalized and the governor signs the budget, we can be able to, they had some errors in what got passed, and somehow they don't have to repass it again. They can change things, the governor can still sign it, usually signs stuff on, so.
and this is the one we couldn't meet because of the PE. We don't offer enough PE at our elementary and secondary. So we do offer PE, we just don't have enough hours because it was based on the state board policy, which was several years ago. So, you know, we've made obviously a lot of changes since then, but, so we'll just have to see what the final regs. Not do one of the other ones, yes. And the other piece is this whole student academic performance incentive formula. We've talked about this, that it's all about growth now. Sharon loves to say it's all about growth. It's not about where you were or where you're going. It's all about growth. And so the good news, as you'll see in a few minutes, is that we're actually going to qualify for one of the $30 portions of math. This is based on MEP scores. We've talked about the formula, but it's basically, you know, you look at your MEP scores and you look at what you did from the prior year. And then at the high school level, it's MME numbers that they produce these figures. The problem is that we don't really have a good feel for where these numbers come from, how they calculate them. I mean, we've done our own, Sharon and I have tried to do our own internal crunching of the numbers, and last year we thought we were going to get it, and then we didn't get it, and then this year we didn't think we were getting it, and now we're getting it. So I don't know if we're either bad at calculating the numbers or the state's just not giving us the right numbers. But the good news is we're going to get, as you'll see in a few minutes, $70, one of the elementary portions and the high school portion. So that's a good thing for our district. So as we look at the budget assumptions for next year, basically I put this in a per pupil because I think it's easiest to see that. But our foundation allowance is increasing from $69.96 to the $70.57. Okay, we're almost at the bottom. We're $34, 30-some dollars above the minimum. So we're getting the $60 per student. So that's about $160,000 in total. We're getting an equity payment because there again, the districts are at the low. They've been trying over the last few years to try to boost up those districts and correct some of the inequities of the districts that get a lot more in foundation allowance per student than we do. So that's an additional roughly $51,000. They are going to reduce this retirement offset payment. We got about $99 per student. That's to help in the reduction of the retirement costs. And so that's going to be reduced by $35. That was kind of a new one that came out of the discussion between the Senate and the House. The governor was just going to leave that alone, and so now that's going to be reduced by $35. As I mentioned, the $52 best practice remains intact, so there's not a loss, but there's not a gain either. So, and then the $70 performance academic piece that I talked about, $189,000, $70 per student. So in total, the grand total of all these numbers, when you add them up, is about $114 per student. So this is really the first time in I don't know how many years where we can actually say we have a positive per pupil difference from prior years. And as I recall, just a few years ago, that number was almost $7,500 per student. You know, they've reduced it over the last few years, so we're creeping back up. We're still far from where we were a few years ago. But, like I say, there's $114 per student overall for us.
What are those numbers and dates? I mean, at some point we see that when we hit our peak.
Yeah, the state. I have those figures. I can get those to you. You know, we had the roughly $400 per student a few years ago. That's what was the big hit. But yeah, no, I think when proposal A started, we were right around the 5,000 back in '95, right around the $5,000 mark. But yeah, I can provide you those figures.
I think we're going to need those numbers in our heads as I think as this budget happens, particularly as we talk about that,
Absolutely,
on the ballot.
absolutely.
I think people have a sense that it's more recent than I think it really is. We've been at this for a while.
Absolutely. And you can see as our fund balance, as that trend a few years ago was going down, that was a lot to make up some of those differences, those losses. So the $114 per student, the contract settlement that we just reached not too long ago actually has a provision to share in this, and you'll see in a few minutes, it's an off-schedule payment, and we've just done some preliminary numbers on what that looks like, but you know, they're gonna get their portion and we're gonna keep our portion. So the good news is that there'll potentially be some additional one-time dollars from this student per student amount, because basically we said if we get more than we got in the prior year in certain categories that we would share in that money, which, so that's a win-win for both employees and for the district. So the one piece that I talked about, that MEPS's pre-funding, that's going to be an additional $320,000 next year. We're just adding that on to the $270 we got in the prior, so it's a little over $600,000 that we're getting. We're just turning around and paying that back to the state. At this point, we're projecting a 20.34 blended FTE decline. We actually had our school of choice meeting today with our principals. We hammered out where we think we're going to be school of choice numbers-wise. I'll talk about that in a minute when we look at the numbers. So I believe part of this is going to be, you know, we'll probably have closer to a flat. However, we're actually going to have to add teachers. So it's not necessarily a win-win to the extent that, I mean, it's a win-win because we're going to have more students, which helps in the future grades as some of those grades carry over. We don't have like 3 sections and 4 sections at Raleigh or Murphy, and we have to keep flipping back and forth. We believe that this number will change. And so, and we don't know if all the school choice kids are going to come. We don't have a lot, mostly at kindergarten. You know, we try to fill in where we can. Our class sizes are pretty good, are pretty large in most of our elementary, but manageable. And our principals have done a great job at help managing that process of where we can take kids. It's, you know, if we have more room at Murphy, we'll move them to Murphy or to Raleigh or vice versa. So that number should be changing. And then other state revenue, around $48,000. When you subtract off the blended decline, you're really looking at only a net increase of about $70 per student. But it's still positive, you know. So there again, this is the first time I can stand up here and say that we've actually had a positive increase in per student numbers in prior years. So that's the numbers there. As you can see, we were originally projecting 2706. The big number right here is kindergarten. We've had the highest number of school choice requested kindergarten that we've ever had, and so we debated this morning of how we're going to handle that process, but that number is going to change. And so even if we don't take all the school choice or they don't all come, we're still going to have to add a section of kindergarten because the numbers will be well over 180, even with a relatively conservative school of choice number for kindergarten. So that's the good news. Also, in 4th grade, we're looking at adding a section there because we have the room to take them, and we're taking in school of choice kids. And we were pretty right on the edge of the numbers to begin with, 28, 29, I believe they were. So what this does is we can add it in, pay for the teacher, and smooth out the class size at 4th grade, and that's at Raleigh. So,
I'm sorry, can you finish your thought? I don't want to go back to slide.
middle school, high school, there's just a few gaps here. We may be up a little in middle school. High school will probably be around that number. So, you know, we haven't had the need for staff adding. I will talk about, we're looking at adding counseling at the middle school because of there's some needs there. So there may be an add in counseling, but all of that still be able to be fit in our current budget plan. So I'm guessing that this number will be, you know, probably close to being where we were last year, pretty flat, which is good news, you know, that we're still staying consistent. And we're not balancing our budget on school of choice in the middle grades, but we are potentially adding, you know, kindergarten. Our philosophy has always been at kindergarten that we take, because we get them at kindergarten, you know, they're in our system in the beginning, and if they have issues that we can deal with those right away, and by the time that they get to the elementaries that they're at grade level or where they need to be. You know, I think 2 years ago we were at 98%. This year we're at 91, 92%, Sharon? 91%. So
That's what all the, yeah, right, just thinking the same thing.
still 90% though. I know
Yes,
you're, but basically what I'm saying is that kindergarten to 1st grade ready, or is it 1st to 2nd? I can't. First. So 91 91% of our kindergartners are at grade level, correct? When they go to first grade. So even with school choice, I think that's a pretty solid number. So, you had a question, Rob?
Go back a slide. I guess I'm just trying to get my head around. This has all been expressed in dollars per student down until the blended decline. And then it's
Well,
student.
what I did basically is I didn't include this number, okay? So when you add in these two other pieces, this obviously is a per student decline, and then this is a small increase. So what I did is from the 114, because of the decline in students and this other state revenue, that nets it down to roughly
So
60.
you're kind of expressing it in terms of dollars per student.
Because I don't want, if in fact we were down 20 students, you know, we have to make up for that somewhere in the budget to do that. And so it's generally by staffing reductions, but on the revenue side, like I said, I like to look at it per student because I think everybody's gotten familiar with that concept of what is per student, how much am I getting more per student.
I guess
So-
my point is this blended decline is a loss because of loss of students.
Correct.
Not dollars per student.
Correct,
decline.
correct.
That's what I was.
I guess the reason I did this is because I didn't want people to think we actually are getting $114 more per student. We are from the state, but when you add in the other revenue reductions because of declining enrollment, correct, the effective rate.
That also FT decline is the number that you do not think will be more.
Yeah, and that, there again, that, we're adding, you know, we may be flat, but we're adding staff to balance that difference. So, so it's not, there's not gonna be a huge revenue increase because of that, because we have to add staff to make up that difference. But like I say, we've had, over this last couple of years, we've had 3 sections of second grade at Murphy, and then the next year we have to flip-flop teachers because now you only have 3 sections going into the next grade level, so you have to reduce there and add back at the grade before. So our goal is to keep 4 sections at each elementary of all grade levels, so you don't have that problem of moving teachers around. And as you recall, one of the reasons that the high school is down is because of the small, started out low, and so that was like, that, the 197 was about 155 at kindergarten. So we've added over the years, but we still haven't got up to the 230. So if we can fill in the gaps, then you're keeping right around 220 at every grade level. You know, 200 to 220. So it helps in the staffing piece that you don't have to keep moving people around. So that's enrollment. So if you put all these numbers together, as I'll show you in a minute, we're basically at a balanced budget, keeping that 1.7 million for fund balance. So all of this up here was really described on that one slide. So we're looking at a net state aid revenue of 506,000. If you net out the 320, that's where you got to the roughly 80,000, rough 186, I think it was, for total net state aid revenue, because you're including this loss here, that 164, Rob, as I said before. K-12 tuition, we didn't have any tuition students this year. We generally have at least one, so that was added back. Transportation, we work with Okemos to take kids to the Career Center. Every other year, we take them the full way or half of the way. We're taking them the full year this year. Next year, we're only going to Okemos, and then Okemos takes them to the Career Center. So there's reduction in dollars that we get from the ISD through that. And then as you'll see, the buses, we're not buying buses this year, so we take away the grant money and we take away the expenditure money for the purchase of the buses. So about $456,000 increase in revenue. On the expense side, this is actually changed a little, but at this point, we were looking at a 0.4 reduction in overall teachers. And as what I want to mention is that you'll see special education increase of 1.5, and as you'll see down here on the parapros, a reduction in parapros. This is really, we're trying a new philosophy with regard to special ed. We're creating behavioral classrooms at each of the elementary levels so that we don't have as much need for parapros, and there's more direct instruction in those classrooms too. So as to reduce the cost of parapros, you're adding teachers and you're offsetting that with a reduction in parapros. We believe it'll be a better model overall for kids, but we'll just have to see if it's successful over time. So that's, you know, we had some other reductions, and like I said, we've already added back, we're looking to add back kindergarten and 4th grade, so these numbers are going to change, but the revenue side will change to offset those differences because we're going to have more kids. So we're going to have more staff and more kids. So this will change when we go through the First Amendment. Unfortunately, I don't know those numbers today, so I wasn't able to make any changes by this point. So we'll do that in the First Amendment. Step increases, that was part of the contract settlement. Resignations and retirements, as you've heard over the last few weeks, we've had quite a few folks, teachers leaving, either for retiring or for moving. And so this is kind of a wild card number, and I'll talk about that in relationship to this adding of contingency. But you don't know where you're going to place the teachers. We're just starting to hire some of those teachers. Some of them you hire at step 1, some of them you hire at step 4. We just hired a special ed teacher, which is normally the case at that top step because they have a lot of experience, and it's a good thing, but obviously it costs more money to do that. And so, with Eric's position, he was top of the step. We don't know where we're going to replace that person. So my initial calculation, trying to be conservative, is that's the savings from that. But that number will change as we actually hire the teachers and find out where we put them. So the one-time contract payment that we had last year, that's what we paid last year. If in fact my calculations are right, based on sharing that additional 300 and some thousand, basically they get 2/3 of it, we get 1/3 of it, of the additional money. That's how it's worked. And it's off schedule, so next year, if we don't get the dollars, we're not going to pay the dollars. So that's the good thing about it, is that it's not added on and factored into steps or percentages on the base, which then roll over into future years, which we've always talked about, being concerned about that happening. So the retirement piece, I talked about that. Special ed parapros, I talked about that. Special ed tuition, part of this whole special ed change is that we had 2 kids that were in a program through the ISD that we were paying quite a bit amount of tuition. We're actually bringing those kids back in our district now in one of the classrooms that we're creating at Raya, so we're saving the tuition costs that we'd have to pay the ISD because they have that program in our building at Raya right now. So we're basically taking those kids from Raya in the ISD program and moving them back into our program and saving money for tuition. So that was part of the whole change, is to try to make the change and pay for all the changes through the change in philosophy. In this case, increased costs in teachers, but reduction in parapro and tuition to pay for that increase in teaching costs. So, and like I say, we'll have to see how that method works and see if it's successful over time. Bus purchases, I talked about that. One-time all-day kindergarten costs, some reductions in sub costs, other miscellaneous thing. But this contingency, roughly that $100,000 in new money that we got, at this point I just put it into contingency because there's just some unknowns right now. So, if the world was, if everything happened the way that we projected it, we potentially could be looking at a $100,000 surplus for next year. We currently have a contingency account of $150,000, so that goes from $150,000 to $250,000. So what that does is gives us some room for those things that you can't plan for in the budget for next year. If in fact things are good, then we would be adding money to fund balance anywhere between $100,000 and $250,000 based on what's in contingency. If all the other expense line items remain consistent with what we're projecting, as you know, that it's not a perfect world, so that we're going to have some changes. But the good news is that we have a balanced budget. We have some money set aside in contingency. Our enrollment now, based on today, is appearing to be flat, which is a good thing. And we've added some staff back, or we've added some additional staff to help pay for those additional students. So the other things, we've talked about the sinking fund at length, but obviously working to educate voters between now and the vote date of August 6th. Monitor school of choice and enrollment numbers over the summer. We just had our original meeting today. We've sent out notification letters, and we'll see how many of those we get that actually show up come the beginning of school. Monitoring other budget bills that the state might affect. The one thing that I do want to point out is that for year 2014-15, the 10,098 hour requirement that we have to have 109,098 instructional hours to meet the state requirements, along with the number of days. It used to be days and hours, then it was just hours, and now it's back to days and hours. But what they've done is we have, like a lot of other districts, have been counting the PD, a certain portion of our PD. You used to be able to use up to 50 hours, 40 or 50 hours in your cost, in your 1098. Now they're going to say you can't use that. So we basically have 6 days, 36 hours that we now have to take and add back into our instructional day, either through adding minutes or adding days to get to the 10,098 because we can no longer use that time. So a year from now, 14, 15, we're gonna have to look at doing that. So that'll be obviously part of the negotiation process, but, you know, if you look at it days-wise, you know, right now, if we were to do that, it's about 12 minutes a day that we'd have to add to meet that. You know, some people would say 12 minutes a day isn't really, when it's 2 minutes per hour at secondary level, is that really doing much for education, instruction? I guess that's a question I won't answer, but it's either that or adding days. So we're gonna have to do that. And then if there are changes, as you all know, you know, we make budget adjustments throughout the year. We'll keep the board up to date as to where we're going as things change. The other thing I do want to mention as a part of this, as a part of our truth and taxation hearing, we're required to post, well, there's one, the way that we've gone about to meet that requirement is to post in the newspaper that we have the budget hearing and that we make our information available. And as a part of that, what we're going to do today is approve the levy numbers for our taxes at the various levels. We have our 18 mills for operation. We have the debt mills of 8.33. We have the sinking fund of 7783. So that's what we're going to do tonight. But that's part of the truth and taxation process, that we have to have the budget hearing and talk about those levies that we're going to put forth for the next school year for the 2013 tax levy. I'd be happy to answer any budget questions. The last thing I want to do is talk about the roof recommendations. If anyone has any questions on the budget specifically, I'll address that. But I just want to thank our staff, our administrative team. They do a great job at really helping me, and Sharon and I and Mike put together all the plans that we do when we put this together. It's not easy. You know, we've made a lot of cuts over the last few years, and there's still a lot of needs out there. You know, we're actually trying to prioritize those right now as we look at potentially getting new money in the future. You know, what are the things that we've cut in the past that we need to think about adding back if we have to do that. You know, we've cut technology, we've cut textbooks, we've cut all sorts of things, as you know, over the years. And so if in fact we start to get some new money, where are the priorities? What's the most important thing? And so we're starting to put a list of that together of what we might look at in terms of ads. You know, that's still far down the road, but I think we need to start having that conversation of what those priorities may be because of those reductions and the ramifications of what we've done in the past as far as cuts. So
Could you zoom back to
sure.
the revenue consensus number you had? Just to make one comment. Just a kind of a general, look at the bottom, 2012-13. It basically says that we're going to have $140 million left in the school aid fund. Well, after the
Right
revenue
here.
consensus, when they came out with budget targets, they agreed to spend that $140 million. So in 2013-14, that at beginning balance will be there, but they'll spend it now. So at end of 13-14, that 172 will be about 32. And assuming that that kind of rolls into the base, which isn't guaranteed, when you look at 14-15, that will put the school aid fund in. So certainly money's becoming better, that kind of stuff, but the one caution I had is like the equity payment that we saw, $19 per student, and some of those others, those may or may not be rolled into the base. This equity has been done in the past.
Well, and
So
this,
we just have to be careful with some of those, I know on top of that, but we're just warning folks that 13-14 will get to the end of the year probably okay. But 14-15 might line us up to have an issue with carrying on the same exact things.
well, and the performance incentive is a good example of that. Is the governor, when they came out, they didn't have enough money to fund the full $100 per district, if in fact the number of districts that they projected would get it. You know, so we were originally projecting that 70 was like 48 because they didn't have enough money to fund it fully. So, you know, that's some of the areas that they added that additional money, which helped us. The good news, like I said, is that none of the things that we've had in the budget for employee contracts right now, they're all one-time payments. And so we're going to be very cautious, obviously, as we go and negotiate in a year from now, as we look at that year, is that, you know, whatever we put in the budget, we have foundation money to be able to pay for that, you know, that's long-term. That's not just a one-time deal. Because then you're just going to turn around and have to make cuts the following year, so. Any other questions or comments?
So it seems like this is sort of cemented that the way this business is done is really just changed, and it's gonna be changed for, a number of reasons, for the time where it used to be, this is your foundation allowance, and it was going up by X the next year, or prorated away at, some calculation. But now you've got all these pieces that are moving, that both have policy implications or are used as policy tools, and then also are just reflecting of financial commitment to not, to live with the revenue that the state gets. And so we're gonna be putting puzzles together every year of exactly what you're getting, and therefore, what you guys are doing now, you're making a puzzle out of our spending too, by only adding things that you know that you have a way to pay for, or not a commitment to pay beyond whatever time period you've got the revenue. And I know there are a lot of other districts that aren't quite, they might see the puzzle on their financial side, but not on their operation side. So I appreciate a lot how you guys have, you're crafting from our end something that will keep fitting with the puzzle, sometimes more happily than others, but.
The challenge will be is those pieces that we've taken out of the puzzle that eventually we have
Leaves
to
a
put
hole,
back
yeah, right.
at some point, because, we need to look at some of those areas, so. The last thing is the,
Better make a puzzle in June
Yes,
than
yes.
the guessing game in October.
Yes.
that is
agreed,
one,
agreed.
that is one positive point that I did mention, is that, once again, this is the second year in a row we've actually had a budget in place by the time we've had to put our budget in place, which, that's a very positive thing.
But even, what David just said about 14, 15, I mean, to know that that's coming now, and to see that we're on a path where we've got to be ready to deal with that reality is a whole lot different than a surprise proration in February.
The last thing I just wanted to talk about is the roofing recommendations. You have that bid that we did several months ago. This is basically to stay in line with our roofing replacement plan. We have about 5 more years left, this year and then 4 more after that. The good news is that it came in at $143,000, which includes the cost of construction management, which is well below what we've had in past years. In fact, we were budgeting about $225,000 for total projects, so it came in well below that, so that will help us out for sinking fund, and if in fact we're successful with the next sinking fund, it potentially could have a little carryover in this existing fund to help pay for some things for future projects. So I just wanted to mention that. So we're making the recommendation to move forward with that bid. And I think that's it with regard to budget. Any other questions? This has already been posted on the web, so the PowerPoint and all the detail is in the transparency part. So anyone who wants to go back and look at the numbers, they're actually out on the web now, so people can go back and look at those. And if they have questions, they can email me or call me if there's anyone who has individual questions. So.
Steve, have you been getting questions, concerns from people?
Not really. Just mostly stuff about the sinking fund, quite honestly. That's probably where I feel most of the questions when I'm out and about with parents and sporting events and things like that. It's still even hard, as the many years that we've tried to educate folks about how school funding works, it's just still to the point where it's very difficult for people to understand school finances. I try to make it as simple as possible, but people, they read in the paper that, there's a 2.6% increase in school funding, or that, we're getting $177 for retirement, or whatever that is, and it's hard to relate that to what does that mean for your individual district and for your student. So
That's why I think we need those numbers in our head, how they affect this thing.
well, and as you know, we had ARA money just a few years ago. We had all this ARA money for like 3 years, so that really plugged the hole for a lot of years for some of the deficiencies we had at the state level. So, it's not just the per pupil, because there's all those other components as a part of that. So, but I'm very pleased this year, because I think, we're in a pretty solid foundation for next year. So that's good news. I appreciate all your support too, because I know it's not an easy task being a board member in this environment.
We appreciate your hard work, Steve. We know that we've got the best guy, so we appreciate it.
Thank you.
This meeting was a lot different than it was a year ago.
Yeah.
So,
Our next discussion item, and that will be paraprofessional layoff resolution. I think Sharon can talk about that, right?
we have 6 paragraphs.
We do. We have 6 parapros that we're recommending for layoff. This is because of the restructuring of our special ed program. And we are recommending the hire of 1.5 professional special education teachers that will help work with our students that have special needs.
Sharon, if I could just add, these folks, when they were hired this past fall in 2012, were notified that this was a 1-year position as well.
Well, yes, when we hired them, we told them there was a very good chance that we would not need them for more than 1 year. So they were all very much aware of that. They've all been notified that this is a possibility. They were not surprised by that.
The change that you're making from what we've heard is really going to be better.
Well, we hope so. We hope so. We hope that we can actually affect student growth with professional teachers, and that isn't always the case with paras.
Any questions for Sharon?
So I think we're recommending you take a look at this evening and take action in 2 weeks.
Board reports, policy and personnel. We did meet and we had an opportunity to go over those items from our meeting on Friday, May the 24th, this evening as discussion items, so I won't reiterate and repeat myself. So, anybody have any questions? We can always do that at the end as well when we start to go into the action items. Finance and facility.
I would say ditto. We met on May 31st and went through all of these items. The only thing I guess I would add is that we did talk about a couple of the other action items that are on the agenda tonight. The renewal of the service collaboration agreements with Williamston and Okemos, which the committee is highly in favor of continuing to pursue, as is staff's recommendation to us.
Great, thank you, Chris. Items from board members?
I would just to say, I thought commencement, obviously, Mike, you were best.
That it was the best one we ever.
I wasn't going there, but I thought it was well done, well done. And we're glad you were back.
Can I just say, I know that Chris and Kristen Belzer helped out as well in organizing some of the things that took place, so I had forgotten to mention you too. So thank you for stepping in, and I was supposed to meet with them on that particular day, but they handled it on their own. I know that Sharon pitched in too.
Another
so-
place where she stepped in and put her mic hat on.
So, thank you.
If I could say, we've had, since we don't have our student rep anymore, because he's graduated and moved beyond, we've had a lot of spring sports success at the high school since school has ended. I know a little bit about some of them. I know, David, you shared me some details about tennis that maybe you could share, but the girls' soccer got to the regional final and did very well, farthest they've gone in a very long time. And boys' baseball won regionals, and they play in the quarterfinals tomorrow night. And I can't find anybody who remembers a time that has the baseballs won a regional, ever.
I don't-
And golf, that's right, too. So, we tell the tennis. And lacrosse did well, and I know girls lacrosse did well, too. It was a very good spring, I think.
And the girls' tennis states.
Mhm.
Team scored, I think, 11 points, which is the most they've ever scored. And a couple of the girls in singles went to semifinals. And it was a few core schools that win every year that finished winning awards. But Hazlitt was very proud of what he did. I think the girls were disappointed they couldn't do more. But it was a good experience. We'll be back next year.
No. And Chris, what time do they play tomorrow night?
5 o'clock at Davenport University in Grand Rapids. And they
Right.
play Grand Rapids Christian, not to be confused with Grand Rapids South Christian, which they beat on Saturday.
We did have a handful of track and field student athletes who participated in the state competition. Don't have, but it's been a very successful spring.
I'd just like to recognize, I know that Paula attends the meetings on a regular basis, so thank you, Paul. And then we've got Milton Scales this evening from the township, so thank you for attending, Milton.
Anyone else? Okay, we have 9 action items for tonight. Let me go ahead and read through those, and then if we want to poll, we can certainly do that. Number 1, approval of minutes from May the 13th, the regular board meeting. Approval of the minutes on May 31st, 2013, the Finance and Facilities Committee meeting. 3, approval of minutes from May the 24th, 2013, Policy and Personnel Committee meeting. 4, the computer replacement purchase, which Jeff Casson spoke of at our last board meeting. 5, financial management service collaboration agreement with Williamston Community Schools. 6, technology management service collaboration agreement with Williamston Community Schools. 7, director of food service collaboration agreement with Okemos Public Schools. 8, summer tax certification, and 9, summer tax collection agreements, which Steve mentioned this evening during his presentation. Would anyone care to have any of those items pulled this evening for further discussion? Hearing none, would anyone like to make a
Would
motion?
move approval of the action agenda.
I support.
Okay, all those in favor of passing the 9 action items, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, those are approved. Announcement, our next board meeting will be on June the 24th, 2 weeks, here in the Hazlet Administration Building. I'd also like to say thank you to Paula Clark, Supervisor of Bath Township, as well as Milton Scales, Vernon Township Trustee, for joining us this evening. It's always great to have Principal Bart Wajenki in the house with us. We'd like to say thank you. Anybody have anything else for the good of the board this evening before we adjourn? Well, with that then, thanks for joining us. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
We need a motion.
Oh, see, when you don't do this all the time, I got all the way to the end too. Yep. We need a motion. Do we have a motion?
Motion is.
Okay. All those in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?